Hello, everyone, and welcome to America in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. We are recording this on Friday, October 4th. Last night, Thursday night, about 50,000 dock workers who work at ports on the East and Gulf Coast tentatively agreed to a settlement for a new contract, at least for the time being, ending what had been a 3-day strike that threatened supply chains, potentially could have led to much higher consumer costs. Joining me to discuss this is Casey Harper, Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for the Center Square. Casey, tell us about this tentative agreement and what the strike meant and could have meant.
Sure. I mean, it's hard to overstate the significance both of the strike and the impact it could have had on the U.S. economy and the deal that was reached by the parties involved. I would say that we saw that they received tentatively a 62% pay increase, which, Dan, if you're considering any Christmas gifts for me, my birthday's coming up, 62% pay increase, I'll be, humbly accept that. But
I think it's over 6 years, I think, right?
Oh, for 5 or 6 years. Yeah. I mean, so it's spread out, but even still, I mean, that's over, that's still more than the average worker is getting to be sure. So it's a generous pay increase. Another big sticking point in this negotiation has been automation, Dan, because automation has been increasing in many of these ports, and the workers are of course, very threatened by this. And so they wanted in the deal promises, even legally binding promises, that automation would not replace their jobs. Now, we haven't seen really the details of that part of the deal come out, but I think that's the part that's going to be worked out. The workers must have gotten at least enough concessions to feel comfortable returning to work as they did Thursday night. So automation is going to be dampened at least for the next few years, assuming that this all doesn't fall through. They pushed the new deadline for all this. The suspension goes through January, which is great news for Vice President Kamala Harris, who's running for president, of course. This October negotiations were a worst case scenario for her. So she's got to be breathing a sigh of relief this morning.
Right. So dock workers are returning to work as early as today, although some ports have said that they'll need at least 24 hours to gear up operations. So over the next couple of days, most of the ports should reopen. Of course, they're 3 days behind because of the 3-day strike. So not sure what that's going to mean in the immediate aftermath of the tentative settlement. But they will go back to work until January 15th, assuming that they can finalize the terms of this contract. As you mentioned, automation is a big part of it. I think they were still working out those details. They won't return to striking or whatever. But Casey, during the course of this strike, a lot of interesting information was coming out, including what dock workers currently make before they got this 60+% pay raise over over the 6-year period. More than half of, for example, that as the Center Square reported, more than half of 3,700 dock workers at the Port of New York and New Jersey earn more than $150,000 in the fiscal year. The median income across the United States is $74,000. They were making good money. Now that did include overtime, so that was not their base wage. That included overtime. But I think many Americans would argue, hey, they're pretty well compensated already.
Yeah, I mean, they're making that managing editor level. They've reached that new level. But yeah, I mean, it's of course that's higher. Both of those figures are much higher than the median salary in the U.S., which I believe is between $50,000 and $60,000. Of course, the cost of living is higher in the Northeast. But one thing that was not as well reported is there was kind of a wide disparity. Dock workers in Texas are making a lot less than some of these in the Northeast. And so they're not all making the same amount. And so these raises are going to impact them differently. But it's a powerful union, of course, as we saw, almost brought the U.S. economy to its knees. And so when you have that amount of power, you're going to get these raises. I mean, this is what these unions can do. And they knew that now is the time to do it because Biden is, self-proclaimed most pro-union president in history. Now, whether that's really true historically, who knows? But he has been vocally pro-union. So if you're going to do a strike that shuts down the U.S. economy, there were groups that I was, as I was reporting on this, groups that were saying that this would be worse than the COVID-19 pandemic supply chain issues. I mean, we didn't really experience the fullness of it because it was, the strike was aborted. But if this had gone on for a few weeks, Dan, we're talking shortages. We're talking huge price increases like we saw during COVID and after COVID. So, I mean, like I said, it's hard to overstate how big a deal this was and could have been for the economy going into really the holiday season as well. So, but Biden was the time to do it. He is a union guy. That's what he's tried to frame himself as. I have a story coming about how he has undone, decades of years and years of union accountability measures. And it's just gone. There's been a whole infrastructure in place to hold unions accountable for their use of taxpayer resources, for instance. And his administration totally nixed that. And I've been, reaching out to them, and it seems there's no, they're not going to replace it. They're not going to put those back in place. So, he's a union guy. They got what they wanted. It helps U.S. economy, but it is a tentative deal. Yeah, I just want to reemphasize that, which means it could fall through at any moment if they catch wind, or they change their mind, or internally the workers want more. That's the other side of this. It's kind of like when the president ratifies a deal, agrees to a deal, the Senate has to ratify it. These union deals can be like that. If the workers aren't happy or something comes up to make them not happy, they can still kill it. And man, if they killed it 3 weeks before Election Day, they would really have the administration right where they wanted at the bargaining table.
Just briefly, Casey, in the limited time we have left, of course, you mentioned the supply chain issues in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, reports of people hoarding all kinds of products, including like toilet paper. The same thing I've seen reports of the same thing happening in this past week here. Of course, toilet paper is made in the U.S. She's shipped across the country by truck, not by ship, not coming in from, Europe, South America, etc., other trade partners with the U.S. So it was, I don't know if I want to call it amusing or not to hear those reports because it just wasn't necessary for that. We're talking about goods that are shipped in from overseas.
Well, Dan, I'll defer to your expertise on the toilet paper beat.
All right. Thank you for joining us today, Casey. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.